Hey, everybody, and welcome. Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke.Academy, with our final episode, our final live stream of the year 2025. Happy Thanksgiving. I've got Thanksgiving on the brain. Happy New Year's Eve day. I hope that it has been a wonderful and spectacular 2025 and that you're looking forward to a great 2026 year ahead. As per usual, we are set up on 5 different social media platforms. Currently, we're live streaming on Rumble, X, YouTube, Facebook, and via a separate configuration, a combination of microphone and camera, we're live streaming on Substack. So Substack, you're getting a little different view, but same content. Keep in mind also that a slightly edited version of this typically goes out within the next 24 to 48 hours. That just drops out the intro or any of those sorts of things. Without further ado, before I get into the meat of what I want to cover today, a few things. One is I am keeping an eye on comments. If anything that I say prompts you to questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, feel free to add a comment on whatever platform you're viewing this on. I should see it, and I'll try to incorporate that real time. If I can't, I'll get an answer later. If you're somewhere where you can't or don't want to post publicly on a question, feel free to email me, Jonathan, Jonathan, at unwokeinvesting.com, and I'll get your question out. Let me know if you would like your name referenced or to be anonymous. I find most often when it comes to specifics, people want to be anonymous, and I understand that. That's perfectly fine. I'll answer your question, however, publicly, so that anybody else out there who might have the same question can get an answer. I get questions about things like certain mutual fund families, etc. How woke is my fund? I like to call it. And we'll delve into what's being done with your money. This is, I like to refer to UnWoke.Academy as where follow the money meets freedom economy. We talk a lot about freedom economy, and we have been for years, and that is, in a nutshell, I like to refer to that as a return to real capital markets, not captured globalist capital markets where too few companies, and really, let's face it, over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a little cabal, a little oligarchy of 30-ish companies that have captured the lion's share of capital markets. They're overfunded, and there has been a big push over the past year, roughly, to get back into free market economy, which means funding small business enterprise and properly funding all kinds of different companies, not because they've gone woke and checked the boxes for things like environmental, social, and governance, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, but because that could arguably be argued to be solid companies with good earnings potential. Let's get back to those fundamental basics and away from the woke stuff, I say. And I'm assuming that's the reason you're here and tune in every Wednesday at noon Eastern time to these live streams. So I want to kick us off with a couple of things that caught my attention over the last few days. There was a terrific post that I found on Facebook. Yes, I am still on Facebook, among other platforms. I don't tend to do a lot on Facebook anymore because I just don't trust it, but I haven't abandoned completely. There is a Mandy Johnson, Mandi, Mandy Johnson, who posted on the propaganda used during COVID. And that seems to be something that sort of resurfaced the last, not that it ever really went away, but it seems like the last couple of weeks we've been seeing a lot about recapping how COVID was allowed to happen and how the protocols, how destructive the COVID era truly was. And this is a spectacular post. Mandy Johnson, and I'll tell you in a moment why I'm bringing this up. I'll quickly read through this, and you should find it yourself. I think you'll enjoy it and share it. Propaganda during the COVID pandemic didn't arrive as force, it arrived as care. It spoke in the language of safety, responsibility, and solidarity, and it framed obedience as morality. Questioning wasn't banned, it was simply rebranded as dangerous. Uncertainty, the foundation of real science, was treated as a threat. The science, in quotes, was presented as fixed and unanimous, which was convenient since science normally advances by being neither. Once science becomes a conclusion instead of a process, disagreement stopped being intellectual and became ethical. Fear carried the message. Case counts and projections dominated daily life, stripped of context. Risk was flattened, urgency became permanent, and reflection was replaced with compliance. Emergencies work best when they never end. I'm going to read one more little bit from somebody else in a different post. That post from Mandy Johnson goes on. I suggest finding it and reading the full post. I think you'll enjoy it. And then I'll tell you why I'm reading these. There's a separate post from a Tori Branham, Tori Branum, Tori Branham. Let's be serious for a second. People keep asking how refugees or recent immigrants could possibly pull off billions of dollars in fraud in America when many struggle with English or navigating basic systems. Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Fraud at that scale does not happen without Americans. Billions don't move through handwritten notes or broken English. They move through federal grant portals, state licensing agencies, banks, payroll systems, IRS filings, nonprofit audits, and compliance paperwork. That requires lawyers, accountants, consultants, grant writers, regulators, and bureaucrats. It requires approvals. It requires signatures. It requires people inside the system saying yes or looking the other way. That's another post I suggest finding. Again, I found these on Facebook. Those two names, again, the first that I quoted from is Mandy Johnson, Mandi, and the second is from Tori Branham, who appears to be a firearms trainer and Marine. My reason for bringing those things up is because we talk a lot on UnWoke.Academy about my experiences and years working on Wall Street. Wall Street, I use the term in a general blanket sense, went woke a long time ago. Some people, some really bad people, figured out that there's a lot of money to be made by selling out the West, America, and Western values. It's not universal. There are some good people, especially within larger organizations. They tend to get drowned out and buried because a lot of the senior leadership at the top has gotten morbidly corrupted. And at this point, I can argue vehemently anti-American. Many of these people are actually literally betting against America. They're betting against free markets. They're betting against free will, and enterprise. Enterprise being the development of new business and new models. And what they're banking on instead and investing yours and my money in is a globalist concept of the way that the future should go. A globalist concept of a very small number of companies that are held and owned by overarching, I'm sorry to keep using the term globalist, but I don't find another term that fits as well. A bunch of very, very wealthy families that control things like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and others, including global banks. The view, and I started to see this over a decade ago when I made an unfortunate, I won't say I made a name for myself, but I stirred things up. I'll put it that way. I stirred things up in 2007, 2008 by writing a scathing 3-page letter that I released internally while working on Wall Street, admonishing a behavior of funneling retirement dollars into a company called BlackRock. BlackRock, of course, is now a household name. In 2007, they were very, very big, but less of a household name than they currently are, and less of a global brand. And they certainly didn't have the whatever they've got now, $15 trillion that they manage, whatever it is, whatever they're up to. Leadership at BlackRock have, I argue, I believe, found ways many, many years ago of navigating around the guardrails and the safety protocols to capture and gain control over many trillions of dollars. And with that, they've found profitability in investing our money. And that means things like your 401k or IRA and things like it. And they're not alone. It's not just BlackRock, but they do stand out as one that has sort of become publicly known for steering trillions of dollars into the ultra far left. They bought in very visibly, very vocally, and adamantly for apparently into the far left agenda. That means ESG, DEI, and things like them. We, as American citizens, shouldn't want that stuff. We should not want the far left agenda. What it's done and the intention, the mission of it, is to crush competition. It's kind of worked, but that's reversing. It's untangling, unwinding, because more people have been joining the fight to fight back against the far left. People have called out things like critical race theory, rebranded as diversity, equity, and inclusion, and people have recognized that environmental, social, and governance is simply that Green New Deal that nobody wanted, rebranded as somehow saving the planet. At the end of the day, it's important to note that the far left, the globalist cabal, the tech oligarchs, whatever you want to call them, the bad guys, they can't do much without money. There's a big reason that we've been uncovering and talking about and exposing, we as a nation and as globally, have been talking about the funneling of taxpayer dollars through things like non-governmental organizations into funding far left agenda. But that's only part of the equation. Wall Street, generally speaking, is another factor. And we can't turn a blind eye to one while focusing exclusively on the other. I certainly hope that things happen to clean up the waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayers. But at the same time, I actually argue that fixing woke Wall Street is easier. It could happen virtually overnight. We don't have to wait for regulators to catch up. We don't need investigations. We don't need uncovering and fraud exposure. All we need is significant numbers of Americans to wake up and move their money. Get your money out of the places that have gone woke. Things like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and others that clearly went woke. And personally, I see no indication that they've changed course. They give a little bit of lip service now and then to scaling back their exposure to ESG or focusing less on it. It appears to me, overwhelmingly, based on the research that I'm doing, that that's just lip service. I believe that the leadership at the top of many of these organizations, they hold out hope that maybe they can ride out the Trump era, Trump 2.0, and maybe someday they can get back to that. Again, forgive me for the use of terms. I've landed on a few. They can be inflammatory, but I don't know what else to call it. Global communism. The intention of global communism, imagine, if you will, if you're one of those billionaire families that goes to those the roughly annual retreats where you decide how to socially engineer the planet, and you decide that how to deploy your billions of dollars into opening borders certain places and overriding and hurting and destroying countries, those type, the what's it, the Bilderberg meetings, that type. If Bilderberg isn't familiar, you can do some web searches and find the group of people behind that global initiative. The United Nations World Health Organization type that control those types of entities. Imagine for a moment, it's not a great leap of imagination to, and it doesn't take very much research to figure out that many of those same families that control billions and billions of dollars also have significant ownership and control over many of these mega money manager organizations. They exert undue political power and financial power to steer those trillions of dollars and how they get invested. Now imagine if you found yourself in a position to be able to control the ownership of uh, let's just call out some of the 30-ish companies that have been overfunded over the last 6-ish years. You've got Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia, Amazon, that click that and include, of course, in those big pharma, Johnson and Johnson, Merck, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and some others. They have been rapidly, just preposterously overfunded, and they have so much money that their stock price has arguably grown ridiculous. And just for basis of comparison, so you understand where I'm coming from with that. Recently, it was posted that one company, Nvidia alone, as a stock, is larger than, I want to say, I believe it was compared to the German and Italian markets, their entire publicly traded market. And that one company, Nvidia, according to their stock price, is larger than those two countries' stock markets combined. That's overvaluation. And what it means, if we were to allow that to continue, is ultimately you have a very small number of people controlling virtually all of the money and capitalization that funds business development and economic development. And they then effectively control all goods and services, distribution, and supply chain for virtually everything. We're actually not that far removed from that right now. If you look at just one company alone, to give an example, Amazon as a company has grown to the point where they control Amazon as a, I call it quasi company. Amazon controls a significant portion of publishing, some major components of pharmaceutical distribution, supply chain, and web traffic. That is dangerous at best and catastrophic, possibly. What should happen and what we should expect in a sane, rational, reasonable world is that companies like that should be broken up into lots of small companies so that there isn't too much control in too few hands. People want to point to Jeff Bezos as control, but I'm not personally convinced that Jeff Bezos is actually in control. I believe that there is significant collaboration or at least opportunity for significant collaboration between regulators, politicians, and the entity that we call Amazon. Look at how ubiquitous they've become in so many major markets. Now apply that same principle to pharmaceutical supply and delivery, medicines, military equipment and supplies, and publishing, you name it. That mass consolidation, the centralization of virtually everything is harmful, and it's not something that we in the West should want. So the mission and the purpose of UnWoke Academy is to expose these things, call them out for what they are, and then talk about and report on better alternatives like free markets. Flashing back for a moment, if you haven't watched any of the episodes that I did covering the release from Donald Trump's White House from February 21st of this year, 2025, Donald Trump released the America First investment policy. That's a great document that encourages exactly what I'm talking about. It encourages a return of capital markets, a free market economy, where businesses are free to compete based on their merit and not on woke perceived standards that are ill-defined or nonsensical to begin with. And again, I like to be as clear as possible, and I don't want to leave anything hanging in this conversation. When I say that these terms are not defined, I'm referencing a number of things specifically. I actually did a request for information in 2024. I spent about a year going to a great number of money managers, companies like BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard and many others, and asked for definitions of things like environmental, social, and governance, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I asked for their feedback on whether or not the money managers were using those in replacement of traditional measures of investment opportunities. So, in other words, forever since the beginning and advent of the stock market, people would look at the solid fundamentals, the financial statements of firms. When Wall Street started to go woke, a lot of that got replaced by that, I call it box checking. They got replaced by these virtue signaling standards of environmental, social, and governance and DEI and stuff. So I asked those money managers to define them if they're using them. I got exactly 0 formal responses. I had many, many conversations in the hundreds with former friends of mine and colleagues from back in the day when I worked on Wall Street who would tell me off the record that they were effectively forbidden from asking any questions. And I learned through research, looking at websites, reading quarterly and annual statements, and talking to a lot of people that those terms were never actually truly clearly defined. So when you reframe the investing of other people's money, and in the US, we're talking about roughly $46 trillion of yours and my retirement savings in your IRA account, 401k, and things like that. $46 trillion. And when you move the goalposts from a defined metric, defined standards that dictate how your money is to be invested, and when you erase that and replace it with something that's not defined, and it's just simply feel-good virtue signaling, like we're going to create a diverse and work environment. Well, what does that actually mean? And how is it measured? Because of course, if suddenly you move $46 trillion into those new type of investment standard, how do you track it? How do you find out if it's performing and meeting whatever standards are defined? None of that actually happened. I was not able to find it. If it did, you feel free to surprise me. Correct me if I'm wrong. But none of it was defined. There weren't people that said, we're going to move the $10 trillion that we manage in investor funds and all these mutual funds and exchange rate funds. We're going to change all that and invest in a completely different way that's woke and far left, and we're going to define it, and then we're going to track it. That didn't happen. And that's a broken system. So going into 2026, hard to believe, tomorrow will be the beginning of 2026. The mission is to get more of this message out in bite-sized pieces to the public so that you, the average rank and file investor, your financial advisors, your financial planners, the people who manage your money can step up and do a better job of answering these questions and a better job of managing people's money in a way that isn't woke, that isn't mass consolidation and overfunding too few investments. I created an episode that I called The Globalist Bubble, where I highlighted all of this. The harm, the potential threat to investors, to the West, is catastrophic. If I'm right, and you have the money that used to go out to fund all sorts of different business enterprise and ventures is now in the hands of just 30-ish companies, what happens when there's a correction in those 30 companies? My guess, because people ask me all the time, what is my prediction? My prediction is that that is going to be used as a political tool in next year, 2026, in the lead up to the midterm elections in the US. I believe that we might expect a massive market correction coming back down to realistic values for those small number of companies that were overinvested. And then I believe that the globalist cabal, the far left, whatever you want to call them, will try to hang that around this Trump administration, the Republican Party, and try to use it to create even more anti-American, far left people getting into office. They will try to use a market collapse to try to point to current Trump policies as a reason not to vote in the patriotic conservative Americans who should be swept into office to continue to clean up all that's broken and bad and wrong and damaged after 4 years of the Biden administration. Anyway, I've spoken my piece there. That's going to be the mission for 2026, getting that message out. This has been another weekly Wednesday episode of live stream of UnWoke.Academy. Mark your calendar for next Wednesday. It'll be our first 2026 live stream. Bring your questions. And again, remember, you can email questions to me at Jonathan, Jonathan, at unwokeinvesting.com. In the meantime, Happy New Year, everyone. Take care.